you could make the argument that awareness is the survival skill. I've had the experience multiple times in nature where maybe I see an animal show up in my mind, and then a little while later I see or hear that animal. And they all, when they just have this kind of training, say, yes, this is a real thing. This intuition, this peripheral, sometimes it's called peripheral sensing. You can sense something
Yeah.
from far away. It's a real thing, and it keeps people alive. Sub-nervous system, or this deep nervous system awareness that happens where they know before somebody shows up that somebody's going to show up.
Hello and welcome, Mr. Nate Summers. It's an honor to talk to you. You're the author of Scoutcraft, Shadow Survival, Awakening Fire, and Primal. And yeah, I'm looking forward to have this conversation with you. Great that you're here.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Really, really happy to be here. I really appreciate you reaching out. You wrote actually reached out to me quite a while ago when I was still writing the book. You were so excited about the project, and I really everybody who had that enthusiasm, that excitement for the project, it was very helpful when I was writing it. So thank you, and it's an honor to be here. I'm excited to chat.
Nice. So maybe you would like to share a little bit of how you get connected to this whole topic of Scout, or I like to phrase it as, because there's so much involved, and I like to phrase it more like as the archetype of peaceful warrior, or you called it also ranger, or in your book you also speak about ninja. It's all about the same archetype that most cultures used to have. It got a little bit lost in our culture, but I would like to know how was your path to feel attracted to this path?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do share about that some in the book. Some in the book that's partially my story, though I try to be it not just my story. It's a book about how to do these things. But I grew up in an age you know in the 70s and 80s in the United States, where it was pretty normal for kids to go outside and play all day and barefoot and drink from hoses. And I mean, I wasn't in wild nature, but I was in nature a lot. And we would play a lot of games and do a lot of things that kids do naturally, hide and seek games, go on adventures. And so myself and many of the people I've talked to, we describe how that early childhood experience was very important on this path of the scout, the path of this, like you were saying, the peaceful warrior. Um, but finding even then this longing to be like that hero role, that protector role. And so then later, and I got into martial arts relatively early in my childhood, like in elementary school, but then when I was at the beginning of high school, there was an opportunity to go to a special camp that was south of where I lived. It was a few hours south, and it was called an archaeology camp. So it was meant to it, we kind of got excited because it was an archaeology camp. One of our history teachers was taking us there, but really it was this whole Stone Age immersion camp where we were making stone tools, we were living in shelters, traditional shelters, we were making fire. And part of what we did there was go out in the woods and play these much more sophisticated games. I'll use quotes like games because there's a lot more going on. And that's where I first got, exposed to the idea if you just sit quietly in the woods for a while, the birds will come back out and the animals reveal themselves. And so I went there when I was in high school in the summertime, I would go there for a week or each summer and immerse myself in this camp over and over. And even when I went to college, I went there a couple of times. It's a very meaningful experience. And some of the man who ran it, his sons really were mentors for me. He was a mentor for me, and they really embodied all of these things. And I kept going on my martial arts studies as well. And then later, I finished college. I came out to the Pacific Northwest. I worked out in some summer camp programs. And eventually I met people at Wilderness Awareness School. And that's where I met John Young, who is one of Tom Brown's main students. So I don't know how much our audience is familiar with those folks, but Tom Brown, very, very well known person who started the Tracker School, very influential and kind of one of the main people that started the revival of survival skills in modern times. And his story is that he learned from an Apache elder named Grandfather. So I worked with John on and off for many years. I still work with John, and John was able to like really open up whole new realms around bird language, movement, navigation, all these skills that go along with this path. And so, yeah, I've spent a good amount of my adult life teaching those kinds of things or things related to that, as well as, guiding some expeditions, teaching adults, teaching kids. So, yeah, and then I still am studying martial arts. I feel like those go really hand in hand. So, yeah, so
Yeah,
I hope that answers your question, Daniel.
nice. I'm a Systema instructor, and I have a
Oh.
Systema school in Leipzig in Germany. And you've been training with Scott Sonnen, and he's a student also of General Ritunsky. I've been training with him
Mhm.
as well. And he also he used to have a lot of outdoor camps, and it somehow got lost. And I'm
Mm.
trying to reconnect to that because that's a really, really important aspect of the system to yeah, to train in rain, in snow, in wind, be outside, learn some awareness skills. And what I liked about your book is you put a lot of emphasis on awareness skills because really without that, it's all the skills we have, if we are not aware what's going on around us and what the dangers are around us, it doesn't really help. And what can this kind of training that you write about and that you teach can bring us as society, as humans?
Yeah, yeah. So those are really great questions, great things to ponder. And before I dive into that, I just want to say I didn't realize you were a Sistema instructor. That is awesome. I love Sistema. It's one of the most interesting and I think integrated forms of martial arts I've been exposed to. I mostly train in Chinese internal martial arts, like with the Bagua and the Xingyi and Tai Chi and stuff. But Sistema seems to me very similar principles. And I love that Sistema is one of the places I've seen the martial arts, the awareness, the survival all together. And like
And
you're
you,
right, it's not as much anymore, but it's in its roots, And I've only trained with Coach Sonnen just a couple times, but he was really impressive. I really like what he does. Some of my students have done Sistema, and yeah, it's really good stuff. And I think Systemic kind of offers a great lens to kind of answer your question or look at your question because, you know, right now in where I live in the US, the only time you would use these things, most people would think the only time you would use these things is if you work in law enforcement, if you are in the military, maybe if you are a first responder. But really, I think we're also entering a phase where we're realizing, wait a second, everybody, everyday people used to have to pay a lot more attention to their surroundings. We had to be looking for predators, looking for enemies, looking for threats, evaluating, can we get food and water from this place? As humans, we lived that way for a very long time. And so now we're living at a time where our awareness is captured most of the time
mm,
on by a screen, right?
mm,
I mean, even this, we're talking through a screen. I mean, I'm looking out the window and you have a window behind you, but like, our awareness actually narrows, right? So people have commodified awareness,
yes.
in our phones, right? Like, I mean, I have a smartphone too. I use it. I get distracted by it too.
Mhm.
But we want to, re-own our awareness And I think this is important for our families, for ourselves, for our safety, but also for our mental health. I think there's
Mhm.
a huge component of mental health, and there is a direct correlation, at least in this country, between social media use and screen time and mental health stress, anxiety, depression. So freeing ourselves and getting back into our senses is one of, I think, the best things we can do.
Mhm. I I realized that like those basic exercises of the sit spots, listening to the birds, observing, mapping the plants that are around us and figuring out what they're for and if they're edible or not. Mm, I realized that I get a way better connection to myself, but also like to the place around me. And for example, like those trees that you see out of my window, um, in a few, I mean, I don't know exactly. Some people are fighting against, but in a few months they're gonna log that. So there's a natural reserve just behind this
Oh,
window, basically. I mean, it's very small, but some people decided it's better to build concrete everywhere there. And I
oh,
think, for example, like those exercises, because I'm kind of in a city, but there is a forest and some sort of nature reserve in the middle. And I
yeah.
believe those skills, those awareness skills, they also awaken like a caring for the animals and the plants. And like if I just walk through there with my phone, like most people who walk there, they pretend to walk with their dogs, but actually they're walking with their phone. And
Oh,
that's okay, but what I think is that skills have the possibility to realize, oh, there are squirrels around here, there is foxes around here, and there's so much life around here that we tend to miss. And your this exercises reminded me on how important it is to just sit and observe and connect and to realize what's going on around us. And if more
yeah.
people would have that, more people would care, I think also. And I don't know if we can live without all the trees and animals and
Yeah. 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 We need a biosphere, right? We need plants, animals, trees. We need that to live, right?
mm,
And we physically need it for our like actually just to live.
yeah.
And we're at an interesting time in history where people are more disconnected from that biosphere than they have been maybe at any other time. And so our tendency to care for those things or want to take care of them may be decreasing. But I also think that, we have to look at that as human beings, right? We've been around for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. I look at this from my studies in anthropology of like, what does it mean to be human,
Mm,
right? What does a human actually mean? And we have been, in this on this planet interacting with nature for so long. It's what we really long for. It's like sort of our original longing. Um, with Europe, where you are, Daniel, people have reached out to me recently and told me that even 200 years ago, maybe even 150 years ago, people in Europe did a lot of foraging and growing their own food. Like up to 50% or more of their food came from wild places.
mm,
So that's not that long ago, historically, how much people were looking at watching the foxes and paying attention to the squirrels and watching when the trees leafed out and making their food and their medicine from the land.
mm, yeah. Mm. Also, this awareness, it's so easy to oversee and think like, okay, yeah, I've done it 10 minutes and it's done. I got it. I was sitting here for a while, but there's so much into it. And because there's like a link between scout skills and survival skills and martial arts skills, and that link, I think it's intuition and it's awareness. You also share some experience of awareness and intuition, like being able to protect you in situations. Also, like yeah, maybe you can share something about that.
Yeah, so in every martial art system that I've been exposed to, that high level practitioners, there is a level of body awareness. It doesn't matter external martial arts, internal martial arts, modern martial arts, MMA, it doesn't matter. The highest level people, they have something that's going on where they can tell when you're going to do something. And
Mm.
that's, in some ways, that's their greatest skill. It's like they're responding before you're even throwing the punch, or they're responding as you're throwing the punch, and it's a reflexive thing going on in their nervous system. You know, something's happening at it, and there's no thought happening. It's not. It's a reflex level, but it's almost even pre-reflex level. And it's stunning if you've ever been around a true master who can do that. Like, you know, my teachers, like, it's hard to use words to describe what's happening. That ability can be cultivated and trained, and it's probably part of the most important set of survival skills we have as human beings. So, if, for instance, where I live, right, I'm in the Pacific Northwest of America, of the United States, and it's forested here. There's a good amount of forest. There are still bears and cougars around. There are mountain lions around. Um, Not that long ago, a couple miles from my house, some people were attacked by a cougar. So this still happens. So if we're living in a situation, if we were all living in a situation where we didn't have modern equipment, and we're in this environment, we have to have a gut instinct relationship with the world around us. We have to have that sort of pre-verbal, like intuitive nervous system relationship to know, to understand where the predators are. And this is so old. It's interesting because the places I hear about this the most, there's two places I hear about this. One is intact hunter-gatherer cultures, especially in Africa, especially among the San Bushmen, right? The other place I hear about it is from special forces operators who have been in combat, and there's at least, I would say it's between 10 to 30% of the people who have had those experiences, or who have had that, who have been in that kind of combat, talk about that there's this sub nervous system, or this deep nervous system awareness that happens where they know before somebody shows up that somebody's going to show up, that they're so, you know, I've never been in a combat situation with a gun, right? Like, I just haven't, you know, and I've trained, again, you know, self-defense against firearms, all that kind of stuff. I know how to use a gun. I live in America, right? Everybody in America knows how to shoot guns, right? It's just a thing. It is true. Most of us have actually been, you know, how to use a gun. But it's not my thing. I'm not a police officer, but I have worked with dozens of people who have either been police officers or in combat or ex-special forces. And they all, when they've had this kind of training, say, yes, this is a real thing. This intuition, this peripheral, sometimes it's called peripheral sensing. You can sense something
Yeah.
from far away. It's a real thing, and it keeps people alive, you know, and you cannot ignore your gut instincts, because it will lead you into trouble. And I think that this is probably a physical thing. There may be a spiritual aspect to it, but I do think it's probably a physical thing. And we just don't have the right science or language yet to really understand it. But it
Mm.
has something to do with nervous systems and how our nervous system responds and communicates. And
Yeah.
if you train in something like Systema, or you train in internal martial arts, you train in these awareness exercises, it starts to get stronger. You start to feel it, you start to know it.
Yeah. I think there is a very important point. I think we all have that skill. And I'm there has been a moment where I met a student that he has been dedicated for a few months, And then he just disappeared. And a year later, I met him and he told me he stopped training because it doesn't work because he got basically like he was taking money from the bank and he get kind of beat up and robbed from the bank and there was nothing he could do. And I was like, yeah, if I wouldn't like no martial artist in the world would have been able to do anything if your awareness is fully in taking money from the bank. And
Right.
and it was Friday night, so he maybe also had some drinks and his awareness was down even though he was in a little bit dangerous area. Mm, so
Mm.
so I realized in that day, that has been a few years ago, I have to put way more emphasis on feeling and on intuition. And so I started to put more and more focus on that because all the physical skills, if I feel that there's a danger there and I need this legitimation, yeah, I think that's the right word, to know that this is real and there's a real warning, there's something really changing in my body, and I need to be able to trust it. Because I think a lot of people they don't know that this is real, and then
Right.
they also get the same sensation than other that trained people do, but they think that this must be just some fantasy, and they don't listen to it. And so this value of exposing oneself to this training can really be maybe more valuable for survival, for self-protection, for helping others, for finding stuff that you're looking for. It's such
Yeah.
an important skill, and it's so great that you share this knowledge. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So I was just talking about this yesterday with some people. This notion that awareness is a survival skill, right?
Mhm.
Awareness, because when we think of survival, we think of like shelter and food and water. These are all important things, okay? Of course, you need those things. But if you're not paying attention and you build your shelter near a dead tree that's a snag, and a windstorm comes and it blows that tree down, collapses your shelter, you haven't survived, right?
Right.
Or if you're in grizzly bear territory and you don't see the fresh tracks and the fresh scat, you're not going to be aware that there's a grizzly bear around.
Mhm.
And it comes back to even more basic things of like, when I'm in a dangerous situation in a city or I'm driving or whatever it might be. And it doesn't mean that our nervous system can't sometimes be a little overly stimulated or overly anxious. There's, we have our people have anxieties based off of their past experience that can definitely color their current experience. But there is a way to develop this to train it. And it's not just awareness is a survival skill. You could make the argument that awareness is the survival skill,
Mm.
the original survival skill.
Yeah.
And that when we think about where do we come from as humans, we are descended from people that were practicing awareness all the time because they needed to in order to live, right? Yes, they were good hunters. Yes, they were good at making clothes. Yes, they were good at uh, gathering plants. Yes, they could make fire. Yes, they could make shelter. There's all these things they could do, but the unifying underlying baseline was awareness of their surroundings and what was going on. So
Mhm.
I'm really glad to hear that you're incorporating that into your training. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, I do, and not many people do, unfortunately. But I realized that in all areas of my life, I can use the skill. Like which decision to take. I'm getting a gut feeling when I'm opening my fridge and I know what's gonna harm me and what's gonna support me. Like there's different tensions in my body. For me, it's
Yeah.
mainly tensions. I feel like tension rising, and for other people, I think you also write. You get pictures. You were speaking about bears and cougars, and you get pictures of them when you're in their area. That's fascinating for me. Yeah, maybe you want to share something about that.
Yeah, yeah. So I go into some sections in the book of what I would call advanced awareness. And
Mhm.
I find this stuff very interesting. And some people might say, oh, this is new age or this is a spiritual thing. And again, like I think it's actually a scientific thing. We don't have the language or the science for it, but there's very interesting things. And like what you were just saying, Daniel, sometimes we get a body sensation, right? So we
Mm.
might feel like one thing is like we talk about body radar, where you're pulled in certain ways, right? You might be pulled, you physically find yourself going like you're trying to find something. Like let's say I want to go find water, like I really need water. Like my body may be able to find a way to pull me towards water.
Mhm.
The other thing that can happen is if there's something dangerous, and I've actually heard about this from people in combat situations and also around predators, like animal predators, that their body, they don't know why they're going on one trail and their body will pull them away from the danger, and they'll end up going around the danger. And then later, maybe they'll find like tiger tracks or lion tracks where they were originally going, right? So there's this pull in our body. Then there's this whole other thing, and I think most people are familiar with this one. Maybe they're not as familiar with the body radar, but this is that sense of like the hair on the back of your neck standing up, the hair on your arms may be standing up, or even more basically, the sensation of being watched, right? So how often have we felt like we're being watched and we turn around and there's somebody over there looking at us, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe more often we're actually the person, we're watching somebody, maybe we're just unconsciously, we start to follow somebody with our eyes and they stop and they turn and look at us because they can feel our gaze.
Right.
Most women I've talked to are very familiar with that. They have to be. They have to watch out for danger in terms of predators, male predators, right? So they feel that gaze. They can feel that gaze.
Mhm.
Um, then there's sensations we might get like you were describing of like maybe we feel a tension, like, or we feel like sometimes people might feel nauseous, like they're like, oh, I feel nauseous for some reason. um I often feel if there's something that's not great for me, like not necessarily imminent danger, but something not great for me, I feel tension between my shoulder blades. And then when I'm not there or that tension isn't there, it goes away. And
Mhm.
some of the instructors that I used to work with, we would play this game where we would like, some of the instructors would be over here and some people would be over here with some students. The instructors would start to pay attention to one of the instructors or one of the people over here. And as soon as you feel that, you start to feel that tension. And then you're like, wait, what's going on? And then you have to move away. And it was a game to see who could feel it.
Mm.
In the Tom Brown school, they talk about this as sensing presence. You can sense a presence.
Mhm.
And then the last piece you were talking about, Daniel, is this idea that we can get pictures in our mind. And again, I think this is something most of us have experienced at least once in our life,
Mm.
where we suddenly think about somebody and then they either call us or they text us or they email us out and we haven't talked to them for a very long time. And you ask most people who say, did you think about that person before they reached out to you? And usually they'll say, yeah, I was thinking about them. Well, more often, if you ask them more questions, you're like, did you just suddenly get an image in your mind of that person?
Mhm.
And then you started thinking about them, and then you got a phone call or text. Usually they will say, yes, they're right. I got a picture in my mind. So
Mhm.
there's some capacity there. Um, and again, I don't know that English, and I'm not sure about German. I don't know. I think there are other languages where they have a more developed vocabulary to talk about this. But excuse me, I've had the experience multiple times in nature where maybe I see an animal show up in my mind, and then a little while later I see or hear that animal.
Mhm.
But it's not, I don't think it's a psychic thing. I don't think it's it's not, and it's not necessarily any special meaning either. It's just like, and often I think in those cases, it's that animal is actually aware of you. Like it's become aware that you're in its territory, and then you feel its awareness of you, or something like that.
Mhm.
So I could go on and on about this. I find it very interesting. The last piece I'll say about it is I think that, and I want to emphasize this because you said this, we all have these capacities. This is not like a special thing because I'm born genetically a certain way, or I'm clairvoyant or something. Though there may be people that have that. This is something that most people I talk to have had some experience of it, and they can grow it through this awareness training. And they usually have one of the ways I just mentioned, they usually have a natural inclination towards one of those ways.
Hmm.
And I say this, and sometimes I get in trouble with this because it's not very popular to make generalizations these days, but generally my experience is women are more naturally gifted at what I just described.
Hmm.
They already are in tune with it, and they develop the capacity quicker. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, it's also my experience. I've been teaching women self-defense also, and I noticed that we do intuition training there as well, and they're way
Mhm.
more open for it mostly, in my experience, and they're way more successful,
Yeah.
sometimes also even way more successful than I am,
Yeah.
which
Yeah, totally.
also quite surprising because I've spent many years experiencing with that, and yeah, so it's I totally agree. Mm, there is another thing that's kind of built on that topic, maybe. It is sending the mind ahead. It is
Mhm.
also a topic that I think people experienced it before. Like, and they don't even notice. We don't even notice. I think we all have that. We're driving somewhere and we already know, like on that play, or like, I don't know, we go to a dinner and we know that this and that is going to happen there, or there's a feeling that I'm going to find this parking
Yeah.
space there. It's something that always happens to us and it's quite normal. But the first time I did this consciously, so also here there's some very skilled students of Tom Brown that share this kind of skills here. And the
Nice.
first time in scout trainings where I explored this tactics or however you want to call it, these ideas, I was really surprised how well it worked. And I have a specific question to you because there we were in a big group, in a big setting. A lot of people were open for this skill.
Yeah.
And that created, I don't know how that works, but it created some, I don't know about the term. I have to use magic because everyone was so open for it, and we were all together, and we created a simulated necessity to make this work and to figure out what is in front of us before we are there because we don't want to be detected. And
Mhm.
later, I was practicing that for myself, and it was so difficult and so disappointing. So, do you think that being surrounded by people who are open for this or who are like really want to grow in this area is making it a lot easier?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a very interesting thing that is, again, is kind of like it's cutting edge science. Maybe it's borderline magic. It's almost like ceremony, right? And yeah, definitely they talk about this in the Tom Brown lineage, and Tom Brown talks about this. But I want to presence that I heard about this in other places as well. Like there's a teacher I mentioned in the book, Gilbert Walking Bull, a Native American man, a Lakota man, a holy man. And he would talk about this. Yeah, like when you send your mind ahead, you go there. And what you see there is real. And then another teacher I mentioned in the book, a woman I studied with, she had studied in some of the early remote, or she was a subject in some of the remote viewing research. That's kind of the more like CIA and other things were doing this thing where you just send your mind from thousands of miles away, and what can you see? So the success thing, I think what you bring up, Daniel, is very interesting. So like if we had a group of people and we were all practicing survival skills together, right? And we're doing like a survival weekend immersion, there's a quality that starts to develop in the group, right? There's this uh, similar feeling, right? And so it may be that as a group we experience a camaraderie, And we also experience a certain level of success. We're all on the sort of same page. Our nervous systems are kind of in the same place. So we experience something maybe that's different than when we're by ourselves. Same thing, like I'm sure you've seen this with Systema seminars, right? You get everybody together Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's just like this incredible thing. Your body gets into this incredible place. It opens up. You're so fluid and connected. And then, you go back to work on Monday and it's different, right? So for whatever reason, the skill you're talking about, the sending yourself ahead, the success rate does go up when you're around a group of people that are doing the same thing, that are receptive, that are practicing those awareness things. And it's sort of like, yeah, all of that collective quality pulls everybody up. And so, yeah, you tend to experience your success rates higher. I've definitely had that experience. Even in a remote class, not even when we're all together physically, but doing a Zoom class, everybody's doing these exercises and you're getting all these successes. And then it's like Tuesday morning, you're out doing it and it's not the same. So there's a couple things we can do. It's good to practice on your own to keep going, right? In fact, there's a quote from Hatsumi Sensei, the founder, or not the founder, but one of the main modern carriers of ninjutsu, who talks about that, the importance of the hardship of training on your own. That it will be harder, but to achieve real results, we need to train on our own. Versus that sort of collective field. Like that's another word that's used in English. It's the field that's created by all of these people, that then what's possible is different. And maybe that's like, people who go to church and they pray for somebody's healing, and then there's this remarkable, miraculous healing. There are things that are more possible.
So interesting. So interesting how this group dynamics is making the skill so much sharper. And that goes, you mentioned that also for martial arts, for everything, it's so much different to train in a seminar with many people than alone or with a friend. Even though that's also very valuable. What I really don't get is how can that work through Zoom? I had just had my first intuition training through Zoom, my first intuition training to Zoom 2 days ago. So I'm just new with that all these online things, and it was people had great successes as well. And
Yeah.
this is really amazing that you don't even need to be on one place, and still the energy is somehow higher, success rate is much higher.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Yeah, I was very resistant to teaching on Zoom for a very long time. I did not start teaching on Zoom until COVID, and until people were trying to get me to teach on Zoom, and I was like, no, what I do doesn't work on Zoom. And then I had to teach, and so I started with very concrete things, but I've been very surprised. And there's a very unusual book. It's this really great book. I reference it in my book by this woman, Diana Pasulka, and it's called Encounters. And in this book, it covers a lot of interesting things. It covers artificial intelligence. It covers all sorts of different stuff. But there's a character in there she describes, a person, it's a real person named Jose, who is a veteran. He's a veteran, I believe, from Afghanistan. And he talks about this network, and so this is not like the network we're using with Zoom, right? But it's like there's another network that's connected to the biosphere that is worldwide that we can tap into. And when you tap into this, and he would tap into this network, these were his words, he would use it in Afghanistan to keep his friends safe and keep himself safe because he could see where the dangerous spots were. So when we're doing this work with others, one way of us understanding is we're all tapping into that network. And there may be some people that are out there that they're always in that network. And it may have been that as human beings, 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, we all had to be tapped into that network all the time. I certainly have heard stories of Aboriginal Australian folks, and also African Bushmen, and then, potentially some people in Native North America and Hawaii as well. The stories of people who were tapped into that network.
Mm. What would be if I'm watching this now as a viewer and I have no idea what we're talking about, what would be a good start to experience that for myself or to try to do my first step in figuring out what this whole network thing is? What do you think?
Yeah, so there's two things, and they're going to seemingly be very different. And it's a very good question, Daniel. I think, like, how do we start this process, right? So at the beginning of this discussion today, we were talking about how some of our senses are atrophying, or where our awareness is atrophying. Our awareness is literally shrinking. So the first thing I think I would recommend everybody do just for your mental health is every day, at least once a day, go outside, even if you're in the city, and just let your senses expand. Like let your vision expand, let your hearing expand, feel the wind on your skin, see if there's any smells that come to you, because our brain, our regular senses are really the gateway to what we're talking about. This that getting deeply connected to our ordinary senses, even our sense of smell, our sense of taste. And there's all, especially with our sense of touch, there's all these levels with touch that it's not just feeling something touch our skin. You feel the breeze on your skin. There's also a sense of temperature that comes to you. There's a sense of moisture that comes to you. Feeling your feet on the ground, and ideally not on concrete, just like on actual soil, like just feeling your feet on the ground. Doing that once per day, I think, is a really good start. That kind of starts to tap you into that. Then the other thing, and this is gonna, people are gonna be like, that doesn't make any sense, Nate, but I'm gonna still tell you to do it, is start paying attention to sensations you get and writing them down and journaling it. A big part of all this training I've done is journaling, like writing it down and then watching what happens, because it's often in the moment the things we're experiencing are very subtle, especially at first. We'll dismiss it or we won't even notice it. But it's like, oh, like I went, I went for a walk, I went by that one place and I felt this strange sensation in my stomach. Like you write that down, right? And then like the next time you go by that place, you're like, I got that strange sensation in my stomach again. And go there a third time, and then you get that sensation, and then you read on the news like a few days before something violent happened there, or somebody was shot, or whatever, like I'm just making that up, but being able to track these things and having a friend or having a group that you practice it with. And this doesn't mean that every sensation we ever get is what I'm talking about, but I think there's more than we realize, especially sensations of suddenly feeling nauseous or suddenly feeling tension. Like you were saying, Daniel, like feeling tension. Like, why do you feel tense in a place suddenly? And why do you feel more relaxed over when you move somewhere else? And then you can ask yourself, what is this telling me? And it's a pretty remarkable journey to go on.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and I'll just say in general, my experience has been that when people spend a lot of immersive time in nature,
Mhm.
and the more wild, the better. These things do tend to naturally start to happen for them more regularly, just on a daily basis.
Yes.
Um, so if you get the chance to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. If I'm outside for, I don't know, more than 4 days and I come back, I'm almost overwhelmed because I'm opening up so much and I kind of have to close it back down to be able to function because traffic and lights and sounds and people and so many cars and Yeah. So it's I think the key is to learn to be able to open and close depending on what amount of danger is around us, and or maybe not just danger, but when how much we can afford to open up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm, what do you think? I mean, what I notice is that these skills we're speaking about, they are for most people, and sometimes also me, unfortunately, they are really missing in our life. And I'm always a little bit, like my whole life, I'm a little bit worrying about humanity and where we're going and how we're living. And I think
Yeah.
these are quite some skills that could change quite a bit. Because if I have a real strong connection to myself and to the yeah beings around me, and I'm feeling what's right and wrong inside of myself without being too much up in the head only,
Mm.
I think mm, the world would change and our behavior would change. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I've been a professional survival skills instructor for over 20 years.
Mm,
And I have gone on my own journey and I have seen, you know, dozens of students, go on their journey around somehow thinking that in our lifetime, things will radically shift and we will go through some sort of collapse or some sort of, thing that where everything will fall apart. Um, I've also now lived through Y2K, 2012, 2020, all these things and society kept going. So I think we have to be honest too that our infrastructure may be more strong in some ways than we think,
mm,
but I think we almost have a responsibility as humans to be ready or be prepared that our food might not always come from the grocery store, right? Like I've had a good number of Mormon students, and I don't know how familiar this audience is going to be with the religion of Mormonism,
I don't know.
the book, yeah, the so Mormons are a sect of Christianity that's started in this country, and a lot of people live in Utah are Mormons, though there's in other states as well. Part of their religion is you must have on hand enough food for your family for a year. And I think to myself, whenever I heard that, I thought that is so smart. That's so practical. Like, what if we just did that? What if governments did that
Mm,
and made sure everybody had food for a year? So, um, so what people ask me, like, well, because they get concerned about their kids and about the future, and I have kids, and I worry about the future. Like, what do I want my kids to do? And yes, I want my kids to be able to hunt and fish and gather, make fire. Like, I do think that's true. Um, but I don't see us returning to a Stone Age level of technology anytime soon.
mm,
Even if there was some massive cataclysm, like something beyond what we can imagine, like some sort of impact from the sky, which I think is really the only scenario I've come across that could really change things that fast, that radically. Um, Even then, we would still have. There's so much stuff like that's left over in our society, like lighters and cars, that we could scrap metal. Like there's all this stuff. So, but what I tell people is one of the reasons I wrote this book is because this is some of the stuff I want my kids to really know how to do. Like, I want them to be able to navigate dangerous situations and even avoid dangerous situations to be in the beginning, and how to disappear
mm,
during dangerous times, how to be in touch with their intuition, how to, yeah, have those, be in tune with those gut instincts, because I think that's a really important part of being a human, and definitely for navigating any difficult times we may or may not experience in the next 50 to 100 years. And even if things get better, right? Like even if we were to go towards a more sustainable, connected future, we discover some ways to make more renewable power, we start growing more of our food I still would hope that people would keep these things in mind and practice them because they're a fundamental part of being human and help us navigate things.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great. This was really helpful and interesting to yeah share this knowledge and hear about your experiences. And I'm so glad we had the chance to talk. And I'm so glad that we it's ironic that we use this technology to speak about so rather physical and primitive skills almost. Yeah, so it's a great thing to kind of bring it both in balance and to accept. I had some phases where I had difficulties to accept the world as it is and all this technology and everything. And I see there's so much benefits in both, and especially if we manage to reconnect to where we came from and what kind of yeah what is grows around us. If we are able to bridge that gap, then I think there is a great evolution coming.
Yeah, yeah. I have challenges with the same thing too, Daniel. So every day, still. And yeah, I really appreciate this conversation, this opportunity. It's been really fun. And yeah, I look forward to chatting again sometime maybe in the future.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Thank you, Nate. And I would be really curious to hear from the viewers if they have similar experiences about intuition. I think everyone does, but maybe I'm wrong. So I would love to hear about that. And yeah, I'm happy to share everything you need to know about Nate's book in the description. So Nate, you can send me the links and I put them in so people can
Yeah,
find
yeah.
you.
That would be great.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And then I'm going to say goodbye now. And yeah, hopefully see you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Have a great
Thank you,
day.
Nate.
Have a great evening.